this is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm bringing you what I think is going to be a sort of chatty monthly recommendations video for the month of January. Monthly Recommendations is a Goodreads group created by Trina from Between Chapters and Kayla Rain. Every month there's a new topic, and you can make a video or blog post, whatever your medium of book discussion is, based on that topic. I will leave the Goodreads group link down below in case you want to check it out. So yes, I am aware that this is the second month in a row that my monthly recommendations is going up very last minute on the last day of the month, on the last night of the month. And I may regret taking my time to make this video instead of skipping monthly recommendations for the month, because I have a lot of sort of more pressing videos that I have to make right now. But the topic for this month is best first books in series, and this is a topic that I'd frankly love to have, you know, a kind of chatty discussion about surrounding some book recommendations. It's a video where I've kind of been thinking of what I wanted to talk about it ever since the topic was announced, and I just haven't had time to make it. When I started doing monthly recommendations on my channel, my sort of idea was that I was going to only recommend a few books and then use it to sort of have a more chatty discussion about each of those books and why it fit the topic. But I haven't stayed consistent with that, and I don't think that's a problem. I think I like sort of tailoring monthly recommendations each time I do it based on how many books I have for the topic, how I want to talk about them, etc. But this is one that I think is going to be more of a discussion-based video for me, because I tend, I've noticed, to throw around the casual assertion that yes, I am a huge fan of first books in series, and I don't often talk about what I mean by that, because it's not absolute. Every series is different, every author has a different approach to series, and while a number of my favorite series, I can say that I think the first book is really strong, is the best or one of the best books in the series, that is by no means true of every series that I really like. So what is it that makes me say that I am a huge fan of first books? I think a lot of it is that, yes, I read a lot of SFF, which tends to, in series form, focus a lot on action, adventure, all of that, but I really like my SFF to be character-driven. And when I get emotionally invested in characters, it often has a whole lot to do with the arc of their journey and where it started. When I look back on how far a character has come, it's always in relation to how and where they were when I first met them. And so I place huge value in stories that make me care deeply from the start. And often, frankly, the way a lot of series are structured, I don't even necessarily really enjoy the action and adventure that follow in their own right for their own sake. For example, I notoriously dislike reading battle scenes. And so often I will say, oh, the first book in my series was the favorite, because that's the book where we didn't have any battles yet. We were just introduced to people I found I cared about, and my caring about them is what sustained me through the rest of the series. This is all, of course, like very broad generalizations. Let's talk about some books, shall we? So I think the book I've read that most clearly encapsulates what I think of when I think of why I like first books is going to be Fellowship of the Ring. Now, I am in no position to speak as an expert on Tolkien or on Lord of the Rings. I only read this series for the first time, about a year and a half ago, near when I started my channel. I have only read them once, and to this day I have not yet seen the movies. But when I finally read these books, I think all in all, Fellowship was my favorite, and that is because my favorite thing about Lord of the Rings is the hobbits. And it is good, it is fine that my favorite thing about Lord of the Rings is the hobbits. They are our protagonists. I love the hobbits, I love the Shire, and I care about the rest of the series not for the sake of the big epic destiny of Middle-earth. I care about the rest of the series for the same reason the hobbits do, because the big bad evil is threatening their home and way of life. And my favorite thing about Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien chose to show us this big epic story from a hobbit's eye point of view. People say this is the book where nothing happens, and frankly, I don't care, because those big epic battle scenes are not something I really enjoy reading in the first place. So Lord of the Rings is of course a completed series and an all-time genre classic, but I want to compare my feelings about Fellowship with my feelings about a more recent read that is the first book in a series that is uncompleted, that I suspect I may feel the same way about when the second book comes out, and that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is superficially a really, really different story from Lord of the Rings. This is like totally different. This is YA, this is new, but this is also a book where some people kind of think it's slow and nothing happens, and this is another book where that's kind of what I like about it. I got to the end of this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was on my 5-star reads of 2017 list. I'll link that for you. That was my last video I just posted. But the way this book ended, I get the sense that I may not like the sequel quite as much, because it ended at a point where it seemed to me like the story is gonna go in a direction where it's, you know, all of the big intrigue and action and stuff is gonna start happening at some sort of breakneck pace in book 2. I could be totally wrong, this is just my prediction. But of course I'm still pumped to read book 2, and I'm still probably gonna love it. I'm probably gonna love it because this first book made me care so much about Laszlo, and to a certain extent Sarai as well, about their hopes and dreams and the things that have formed them as characters. So books like these, where the first book leaves the groundwork for me to care about the rest of the series, are sort of the first thing that come to mind when I think about first books in series and why I often like them so much. But that's not the only type of series structure. There are series where the book that does that for the story is the middle book. For example, for me, I felt like the middle book of Joe Walton's Thessaly trilogy, The Philosopher Kings, ended up being my favorite, because that was the book for me that felt like it was least about plot and had the most heart in the trilogy. And this is all completely subjective, of course. The other middle book that I can think of that did that for me was Binti Home. Of course, I haven't yet read the third book, The Night Masquerade, but Binti Home sort of felt like the book where not much actually happened, except that that was the book that made me care so much about Binti and her personal journey, because it wasn't concerned with the plot mechanics of, you know, the adventure of the first book or whatever's gonna happen in the third. I cannot think of a series off the top of my head where the book that did that for me was the finale. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I just haven't met that series yet. The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is not a book series, and also another thing where I feel like I'm not really enough of a fan to like have educated comment. And I know this is a vastly unpopular opinion, but I really didn't care about the original Star Wars trilogy until the Ewoks showed up at the end. And you can tell how not a fan I am by the fact I can't even remember the title of the third movie, which I'm claiming as my favorite here. But I think I like Ewoks for a lot of the same reasons I like Hobbits, and it was a bummer that they didn't show up until the end. So, tangent aside, and I told you this was going to be a chatty video, there are other types of series where I would strongly recommend the first book in a recommendations video of best first books in a series. Series that aren't based on that narrative structure of, you know, the first book is part of a story, it's the setup for the story, and most of the story is gonna happen later. Books that are more like true series where every book is a contained story. So, a book that I would recommend that's kind of more like this is Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. You can read this book as a standalone and you will be completely satisfied. And that's one of the reasons I would recommend this as a best first book. This is the first in the Seven Waters series. I have only read the original trilogy. It was later expanded with, I think, 3 more novels. But like the first book works on its own as a standalone, the first 3 books also work on their own as a trilogy. And the trilogy takes place each book a generation apart. And so over the course of this series, it becomes a multi-generational family saga. This book lays the groundwork for some of the things that crop up in books 2 and 3, so that come book 3, you still feel like you're part of the same story as book 1. But one of the things that's so good about this book is how it lays that groundwork without feeling like it's teasing future books or like this is something that you're not going to understand until you read the rest of the series. This book really does feel like it works as a standalone. The other thing that makes me feel like this book is more of an accomplishment in its own right than books 2 or 3 is that it is also a fairy tale retelling, which none of the other books in the series are. This is a very strong retelling of the Wild Swans fairy tale. There are versions of it that go by other titles, but that is the fairy tale where the girl's brothers all turn into swans. She has to be silent while she makes the shirts that turn them back into people. And I think this is a really successful fairy tale retelling because it's a story that would absolutely work even if you'd never heard of the fairy tale that it's based on. And because it builds such a rich and complex story on the basic bones of that fairy tale without ever really being untrue to the source. And while the other books in this series all use fae fantasy fairy tale elements, none of the rest of them even try to do this. And that's fine because they're doing something else. They're building this multi-generational saga. But this one still, I think, remains my favorite. And lastly, I want to talk about The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherynne and Valente. Now, if you watched my last video, my 5-star reads of 2017, you will have heard me admit that I am completely incapable of discerning between the quality of the various books in the series. I have given all of them a gushy 5 stars. So I'm not going to claim that this is my favorite book in the series, but I think it is a super good series starter. It is one of my all-time favorite books that also happens to be a first book in a series, so I wanted to put it on this list. I think that one of the things I appreciate about a lot of middle grade is that a lot of middle grade uses the sort of series structure where each book, while they may build on each other, has a sort of self-contained story arc. This series does that. As I've gotten closer to the end, the books are sort of starting to connect together into something bigger. They all kind of build, but each of them is its own adventure. And the reason I would recommend this book super strongly regardless of whether or not you plan on continuing with the rest of the series after is because this book introduces a lot of the main themes and ideas of the series so well. For me, this is less about the characters and so much more about what Valente has done with this series, with the concept and literary legacy of the portal fantasy genre. And I think you get such a perfect portrait of that in this first book. She is paying tribute to so many of the literary classics of portal fantasy that we all grew up on, but she turns them about, twists them around, and really makes them her own. And while each book kind of focuses on some different things, I think this one is super great in and of itself because it does some really good commentary on the genre, and that's one of the things that I like most about Valente as an author is that she does meta commentary very, very well. So here I've sort of wound myself to an end. I'm out of things to say. Here are some of my favorite first books in series. Not all of these are completed series. Of the ones that are completed, I have not necessarily finished the series. I've mentioned that I only read the first original trilogy for the Seven Waters series, and I still have one more of the Fairyland books to read. Of course, Lord of the Rings is a long-established classic, and Strange the Dreamer is the first in a duology where the second book isn't out yet, but I have some ideas of where it's going. If you have things to say about first books in series, or if you want to comment on any of the books that I talked about here, please leave a comment down below. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.